We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swaddling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are you doing?
Well, I'm enjoying this Jubilee weekend. It's great to celebrate our nation's monarch, our nation, and frankly, to have 4 days off work. As I look out the window, the sun is shining. Rain is forecast later, but all is well with the world. How about yourself, Dan?
Been pretty busy with work, but yes, enjoying the peace, shall we say, of the long Jubilee weekend. Yes, something to celebrate and very good to have a few days off work too. So, Mike, what have we got to talk about today?
Well, it's been a while, but we've recovered, and let's hope the borough is starting to. We're going to talk about the Croydon local election results, talking about the mayoral results specifically, and the mayor's first 30 days, how the council seats split down, and there's been quite a lot of changes there. Touch upon the national picture, and also talk about one of our local MPs and his patriotic promotion. And what people might be surprised about, that was Labour MP Steve Reid.
Indeed. Well, yes, the much awaited Croydon election results are in. And of course, we had our mayoral election for the first time, a directly elected mayor for Croydon. And after the second preference votes were counted, Jason Perry for the Conservatives was elected as Croydon's first directly elected mayor. Very close call in the end, just under 600 votes difference between Jason Perry and Val Shawcross of the Labour Party. A little bit of a surprise, I think, that the Conservatives managed to do it, given the way the borough has been going in terms of the demographics and the electoral demographics over the last decade or so. But whether we should be that surprised, given the way that the Labour administration actually managed Croydon over the last few years, I don't know. Mike, what did you make of that result then?
I was definitely surprised by that result. Whilst I would encourage you to go and listen to our pubcast on the Croydon mayoral race, I might want to discourage you because if you hear what I thought would happen, I got it clearly wrong. No, I was definitely surprised. And even I was at the count, the Conservatives were sort of quietly confident, but definitely quietly so. And I don't think Labour had necessarily expected that they were losing. I think it was all still too close to call, with a general sense that Labour might do quite well in the second set of second preferences. What was clear on the night was there was sort of across the place a third for Labour, a third for Conservative, and a third for everyone else. And I know that bore out in results, but you really could tell that from the polls piling up. You could also tell the number of people that voted none of the above. Now, what I mean by that is not Conservative or Labour, and people that didn't vote for them as first preference or second preference was a really significant chunk of the electorate in Croydon. It was something like 38% didn't vote for either of the first two, maybe less than that, about a third, wasn't it? But of those, a fifth of them didn't vote for Labour or Conservative in their second preference, and that was Greens voting Lib Dem and Lib Dem voting Greens. Really was a very common vote ward by ward on the night. So just interesting to see how people voted differently given this. I think there's a general malaise in voting in the borough and possibly in the nation more widely.
Well, yes, you say there's a malaise in voting. There was only a sort of 34 to 35% turnout for the mayoral election, which, given it was such an important election and the first time that people had the opportunity to vote for such a position, a bit disappointing. I suppose it's not too different to many local election turnouts, to be fair, but I would have hoped it would be a little bit higher, given the relative importance of it. But I think the turnout was higher in what we might think of as more conservative voting areas than Labour voting areas. I suspect perhaps after what's gone on over the last few years, perhaps some of the Labour voters simply didn't turn out.
Indeed. I should correct one of my stats just now. I've just found the right stat. 62% of people who didn't vote Conservative or Labour as their first choice didn't vote for them as their second choice either. So I think that's quite a high number. No one got more than 50% of the vote. Although, yes, the Conservatives won, and they won a mandate, and they won it with the help of second preference votes, which is, it's important to understand that. You're right there, Dan. What really happened, the story of the night was the Labour wards stayed at home. Now, I assume that's Labour voters in Labour wards, but we don't necessarily know that. But certainly Labour wards stayed at home. Conservative wards still turned out in relatively high numbers. It really was a picture of people saying, we don't really like either of you, but we like Labour even less. And what we really saw in the borough, confirmed once again, was a geographical split. And when you look at the breakdown of votes, I think quite worryingly, is just how much the South votes Conservative and just how much the North votes Labour. Now, we always knew that, but it's really apparent in some of these results. And the Labour vote staying at home in the North really sort of drove that home and changed the borough. I don't think it's good that people who vote differently no longer live in the same areas. I know there's always been a part of that in our lives, and certain people move to certain areas, but the way in which people are polarizing by where they live, your neighbor doesn't vote, your neighbor votes like you don't understand other people because you don't live with them, they're not part of your community. That's quite a worrying trend for our town, and possibly we see it in the national results as well.
Well, we certainly see it in national level in terms of the sort of echo chambers that people live and work in. At the very least, the parts of various groups on social media, they only see one version of of what's going on in the world, and obviously certain industries, people seem to all think the same, really. So hopefully we won't see any more of that in Croydon, but yeah, a bit concerning. That said, going back to the mayoral election results, some of the lesser known candidates from the lesser parties still nonetheless did quite well. Richard Howard, who was an unknown before the election, he was standing for the Lib Dems. He got just over 10% of the vote and came in third, actually beating Andrew Pelling into fourth. Andrew Pelling, one-time Conservative Member of Parliament and then later Labour councillor in the borough, standing as an independent candidate, so he got to just over 7% of the vote. Really do think that if he'd launched his campaign earlier, he perhaps could have done better than he did. Greens did all right as well, with Peter Underwood. He came in with just 6.5% of the vote. And interestingly, Farrah London of the Taking the Initiative Party also got 6% of the first preference votes. Now, Taking the Initiative Party, very small party, seems to be mostly based in the north of Croydon by the look of it. Complete outsider, but yeah, managed to hold her deposit. Some interesting results there, Mike.
It really was, and what also surprised me was the number of wards. The second place person was not either Conservative or Labour. So the Lib Dems came second in Old Coulsdon and in Crystal Palace and Upper Norwood. The Greens came second in Fairfield. Taking the Initiative came second in South Norwood. Now, there's not very many, but this is a borough that has only returned in local elections Labour and Conservative councillors for quite a few runs now. I know there was a Lib Dem in Old Coulsdon at one point. This is a borough that, granted in the European elections, did sort of split four ways, but has only had Conservative and Labour MPs I think since the 80s. I know there was a Lib Dem in Croydon North West at one point. But it's been a long time. We've been a very, very split red or blue borough. And we've seen a more proportional system, and we've seen a much better split of the vote. Now, it was a bad night for Labour in that they lost council seats and they lost the mayoralty. But the underlying Labourness of the borough, I think you can see slightly in the mayoral vote, whereby there was 3 split wards in the council, Wadden, Addiscombe East and New Addington, and they were all Labour wins in the mayoralty. So, when we have an election that's not got this slightly unique scenario where we've had the Section 114 notices issued, the council's gone bankrupt. Basically, I'm saying when we have a local election where Croydon Labour has purified itself of its somewhat deserved toxic legacy, then the underlying redness of the borough, I think, will seek through. But a great opportunity for the new mayor to shine through in this one. I would just quickly like to say this, we knew a number of the candidates. We'd interviewed people and had Gavin Palmer had spoke at our hustings, and I met quite a lot of them. They all seemed pretty decent people. I think Val Shawcross done the best she probably could, given the legacy of Labour. I know we've touched on that before, but just really congratulate them all for running. That's a heck of a thing to put yourself up as an individual in that kind of circumstance. And I think the mayoral race in Croydon was much better for having a wide range of people, many of whom we might disagree with profoundly, but a wide range of candidates put themselves up.
No, it was certainly some interesting debates. Well, Mike, as we say, Jason Perry is the elected mayor of Croydon. What's he been up to since he's taken office? Well,
your Croydon, the Twitter account of the borough, has been very busy promoting the mayor and what he's been up to. It's worth saying at this stage there are 2 mayors of Croydon now. There's Councillor Fleming, who was the cabinet member for young people, or certainly for education. I can't forget the formal title. In the last Labour administration, has been made the civic mayor of Croydon, and she's now performing that role. And I look at some photos over the Jubilee weekend. I think she's probably enjoying that. And quite powerful photos of a civic mayor from Labour and an executive mayor from the Conservatives at events together for the Jubilee. And I think that's quite good for the borough, having had so much division, to see the 2 parties, frankly, possibly having to collaborate more. But no bad thing after the toxicity of the Newman years that they're doing that. But what's he been up to? Well, we've seen moves afoot to get Purley swimming pool reopened. I don't know how quickly that will happen. It wasn't in a great state. I can't pretend I used it hugely frequently, but from time to time. And the whole site probably needs redevelopment. You can imagine that will take a while. They got the graffiti removers back up and running. I believe they got some underpasses in Croydon cleared out and opened up for fit for kind of public use again. And there does seem moves afoot to get Croydon Town Centre back, the redevelopment of the Wycliffe Centre up and running again. That will be fantastic news if that can happen. I for one am frankly past caring what they do with it. They've just got to do something, because it's such a depressing place to go into Croydon these days. So I think, that's really positive signs. And there's an energy about the executive mayor that I don't think you would ever see from a council leader, just because the role is different. And there's a personal responsibility that Jason Perry takes on that I think's, really positive for him, but positive for the borough. He knows he's on the hook. He's got to go and do things. And that's really good news for us.
Absolutely. The sooner we sort out Croydon Town Centre, the better. It has been left to go to rack and ruin whilst we've been waiting for this long talked about Westfield development, but yeah, early days for the newly elected mayor. But I think everybody at Croydon Constitutionalists wishes him well in his mission over the next 4 years. Well, Mike, as you said, there's a Labour civic mayor, and then the Conservative elected executive mayor, and there's a reason for that, which is there was also the council elections on the same day. Well, Labour sort of won, but lost their majority, as it were, only having 34 seats in the 70-seat council. Mike, it's interesting. It's no overall control. Of course, it's not that important given we've now got an executive mayor. But yeah, some interesting results there where seats changed hands.
Yes, indeed. So we saw, I think, one return to norm, return of what we saw last time, but still kind of an upset, and quite a few other upsets. So Addiscombe East returned Jeet Baines and Maddie Henson as councillors, one Conservative, one Labour. That's a split ward in 2018. It's a split ward again in 2022. I think that's kind of surprising that same results came in. I think there's an element of personal votes for both, and that's commendable for them. Pretty close this time. In fact, it was last time for Jeet just scraped over as a second place, and Maddie just scraped over this time in second place. One thing that's a theme throughout the election results is how well the Greens and Lib Dems did. Just to pick Addiscombe East, Councillor Henson's results this time was down 500 votes. Councillor Baines' results was down 200 votes. But the Greens were up 260 and the Lib Dems up 430 votes. Now, it wasn't enough to get them across the line, but that's a really significant difference in the terms of votes that those parties got. And it's 2 votes in that. It's a bit of a mixed thing. Addiscombe West was similar, where between them, the Greens and Lib Dems were up over 800 votes across their candidates. And the Labour candidates lost a huge number of votes. There's definitely the other parties have been revived in this election. And I'll come back to my none of the above point. But yeah, so that was Addiscombe. New Addington South changed from Labour to Conservative. New Addington North became a split ward with one Labour and one Conservative. Warden became a split ward with one Conservative coming in. Now, if you look at that, you finished second, Simon Fox, Councillor Fox, the new councillor there. But it's a question of how much of that was to do with Andrew Pelling standing in the area and splitting the vote. So I can't say, I wouldn't know, but it does look like that's probably had quite a big influence there. And certainly that's a ward that used to be the Conservatives not that long ago. So made a difference. And then, of course, we have the Lib Dem councillor in Crystal Palace and Upper Norwood, Councillor Bonner, and the 2 new Lib Dem Green councillors in Fairfield. So, and again, that's become a split ward. So there's a lot going on across the borough that's very different, and it's going to force councillors of different parties to work together, which is going to be a really interesting take over the next 4 years.
Yes, picking up, Mike, on those the Lib Dem result and the Greens' success in Fairfield. I think we'll find, whilst we may have got our call on the mayoral election wrong by about 600 votes, we did actually predict that the Lib Dems might well do well up in Crystal Palace, and indeed they did. They got their first councillor for a good long while in Claire Bonham, and I did say there'd be some surprises. And the 2 Greens in Fairfield, Ria Patel and Esther Sutton. I feel a little bit sorry for Peter Underwood, who was the 3rd Green council candidate in Fairfield, and indeed, of course, was the mayoral candidate for the Greens. I suspect he had to campaign all over the borough, whereas certainly the Green Party concentrated, in reality, all of its major efforts in Fairfield, and they got the results. Peter Underwood coming 4th in the actual result. And of course, it's perhaps an example, Mike. I don't know what your views are on this, of course, because his name would have been right down the bottom of the ballot paper. So I wonder whether or not the combination of him not being around in the ward as much as the others, and just simply the fact that his name was down the bottom of the ballot paper, may have caused him to miss out on this occasion.
Dan, you've stolen the thought I was gonna my brilliant insight I was gonna make, which is Underwood beginning with a U was beaten by Clark beginning by a C. He was beaten by 33 votes. I'm positive there was at least 33 people who only voted twice, or who split their vote some way that never quite made it to the bottom of the voting paper. I'm absolutely sure that will be the case. We see it regularly. For those that don't know, it really, and obviously people listening to something like this are going to be quite engaged with politics. You're going to know who you're voting for, the candidate names, where they're likely to be on the ballot paper. The parties are going to be, I'm sure, very up on that. But the reality is, for many, many voters, they just turn up on the day, look down it, vote as many times as they feel obliged to. And it means if you've got a surname like Swaddling or Underwood, you're likely to lose out to a candidate called Anderson or Cecil, just by dint of alphabet. It's a little irony of the system.
Indeed. Well, that was the election that was, but of course, because Jason Perry was elected as the mayor, and he was also elected sort of on the same day as or returned as a councillor for South Croydon. So he can't do both jobs. Therefore, we've got a by-election already coming up on the 30th of June for one seat in the South Croydon ward. So the politics, the campaign's never end in Croydon by the look of it. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes in South Croydon, because it's an area which has been changing, I'd say, over recent years, and but nonetheless, the Conservatives did win all the councillors there on this occasion. So we'll just have to see. Well, of course, there were elections all over London and indeed in many parts of the country on the same day. Interesting developments in Westminster and Wandsworth, more in central London, with Labour taking those councils from the Conservatives for the first time in, I think, living memory. So Westminster and Wandsworth were councils which were in the 1980s and early 1990s were councils which the Conservatives were very proud of, in terms of they had very low tax. So perhaps fair, for the council taxpayers in those areas. But Mike, what have you made of the other results from elsewhere in the country?
Well, there was one thing I wanted to pick up on was Wayne Dixon, who won a council seat for the SDP in Leeds Council. First time they've won a seat on Leeds Council since 1988. So that was a good win for the SDP. Obviously, we've done a lot of work with the party. I think he's done a lot of work in that area, and there was a very large personal vote there. SDP, I think, is a very impressive party. And good on them, really. Good to see them make a breakthrough. More widely on the national picture, and I'll pick up on something we already talked about, which is this geographical split. I know someone that does some work for the Labour Party in Southwark, and they'd kept saying to me, we'd spoken a couple of times post the elections, that in Southwark, there used to be some quite conservative areas. They've now gone Labour. There used to be some quite Lib Dem areas, and sort of they're going Labour, almost completely gone Labour. And there really was a Labour route in that area. Now, of course, this is an area they already ran. They already got the MPs for, and they piled up votes in it. On one face of it, that's good for them. And in some ways, if you don't want Labour in, it's quite good to see them pile up in those votes. I'm not sure it's good for the country that we see this massive geographic split. The same as I mentioned in Croydon, I think we're seeing it more widely. And then when you look at some of the local election results, now the Conservatives clearly did badly in these elections, but it was from a high water mark. it's midterm. You can give all the details. But Labour did surprisingly unwell outside of London. If you look at the number of councillors in England, and I look at England rather than Great Britain because the results in Scotland skew that so much. In England, Labour only picked up 22 councillors, whereas the Conservatives lost 336. So Labour didn't make the breakthrough outside of London. They maybe made in London. I don't have a breakdown for London and non-London, but that's not a great position for them. You look at the Lib Dems; they picked up 194 councillors. The Greens picked up 63, which was a 54% increase on their number of councillors. And a number of other parties, Reform UK picked up a couple of seats. The SDP one I've just mentioned, residents' associations 7, and independents, and all sorts of other things. So there's quite a big change there. But really come out of that is that my reading of the national picture is Conservative voters stayed at home, but they didn't switch to Labour. And Labour didn't make the breakthrough they really should have made in these elections if they're going to form a government after the next general election. Now a lot can happen between now and the next general election. I don't want to make that too predictive of it, but this wasn't that kind of, for those of us that remember the mid-90s when Tony Blair swept all before him in local elections, this certainly wasn't that.
Absolutely not. Now, of course, one of the things which has been going on a national scale has been the whole Partygate debacle. And it was thought that maybe the local election results, if they went really, really badly for the Conservatives, would be the thing which toppled Boris Johnson. That hasn't been the case. But there are a couple of parliamentary by-elections now, unfortunately, for various reasons, that are coming up. So we'll see whether or not the trend continues or the trends change or what have you, especially in light of the inflationary issues that we're having in the economy at the moment, which I'm sure we will talk about in a future podcast. So, Mike, talk about the north-south split in Croydon. Well, maybe there's somebody in the north of Croydon is maybe talking a bit more like somebody from the south of Croydon. Steve Reid, the Labour MP for Croydon North, was recently on Christopher Hope's podcast. Mike, what on earth did Mr. Reid have to say for himself when he was on Chopper's podcast?
Well, as you refer to there, Chopper's podcast, I listen to Christopher Hope's podcast each week. It was Chopper's Brexit podcast, I think, at one point, and it's a fairly right of centre conservative podcast. It's from the Telegraph. It mimics their politics, as you understand. They have people from the left on there, but I was you could have knocked me down with a feather when I noticed that Steve Reid was speaking on it. And Steve Reid gave a very impassioned and very well put interview saying how we need to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. We don't want to moan about celebrating the monarchy, his own belief in the country and what the country means to him and what patriotism means to him and what the monarchy means, and how proud he was when he received his OBE from the Queen, having been the leader of Lambeth Council. And indeed, some of the things he stepped in and done when he was leader of Lambeth Council to help promote the nation. Really interesting, very unexpected from a Labour frontbencher. I mean, I've certainly said for some time, I don't think Labour can win when people think they don't like the country. And I think Labour for too long have come across like they don't like the country. And if a cynic would say that Steve's interview was designed as part of a strategy to push back on that. Of course, a cynic would also then note that the next day, Sir Keir Starmer came out and said that it's a patriotic duty to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee and how much he will be enjoying it and celebrating it. And so there is a bit of a cynic in me in this. But do you know what? Whether it's cynical or heartfelt, good on him for coming out and saying it. It's exactly what a Labour Party that is serious about forming a government needs to be saying and needs to be doing. And, I've no love for Labour. But yeah, right. And it may not be entirely cynical. I should say, Steve Reed comes across as an absolute attack dog. We're talking about the Conservatives, and is one really. But I had to say, on a personal basis, I've met him a number of times, and very friendly man, very good constituency MP. Does his piece and very personable. And it may well be entirely honest what he said. But as a Labour strategy, it's interesting to see them move this way. And yeah, as I say, that's how you form the next government. And I think they're making the change ready for it.
It's certainly a welcome move in tone from our one of our local Labour MPs, and long may it continue.
I should note at this time the little disclaimer that says, of course, they were never patriotic enough to support the vote of 17.4 million British people, but maybe we'll leave that in the past.
So, Mike, we're busy celebrating the Jubilee, but what have we been up to?
Well, it's a good thing. So we've got a few things up on our website to have a look through. A couple of articles from myself. One cut through an opportunity talking about Partygate and the opportunity it provided for liberty lovers to promote the cause of liberty and the cause of the rule of law. It first appeared in the free speech newsletter from Blacklist Press that I write for periodically, and a friend of the show, Christopher Wilkinson, writes. So that's up there. It talks about Partygate, talks about what it means for us. Worth having a read of, I like to think. It's a republish of that, and we'll be doing that from time to time. Similarly, another article that I'd published previously is up there, Be the Change, about volunteerism, about my own sort of playing part in as a volunteer in various things. And really how I think if you believe in a smaller state and you believe in the people rather than the government, rather than the power, then it's partly upon you, incumbent, that you get involved and take part in things. I'm sure many people listening to this do. It's my own sort of experience of that, and a write up there, hopefully will find interesting. A couple of other things on there. We've got an article from Ashley Dickinson for the Christian People's Alliance. He was a candidate in Sutton at the last local elections, and he talks about his experience sort of before and after the election there. So worth a quick check over. And then lastly, in terms of articles more recently, we've got an article for all climate change deniers from Jeremy Wraith. And he puts, he's had a read of Christopher Booker's excellent book titled The Real Global Warming Emergency, and a few other things. He put some items in there. I'll just give a quick quote I rather like from this. The RAC estimates there are 18 million homes can utilise off-street parking to accommodate EV or electric charging at home. How are the other 7 million households going to charge their EVs? That's, I think, a very good question that gets left. Someone that lives in a row of terraced housing gets left unanswered all too often. So that's well worth a read for anyone. Also coming up, and well, thanks to all that attended our May no passport required Thursday, Wednesday drinks. We've got some in June, of course, on the third Wednesday, the 15th of June. We'll be back at the George. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible. So 7 p.m. at the George on Wednesday, the 15th of June.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Well, if you'd like to write for the website or have any stories you would like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter at Croydon Const, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the pubcast, and indeed the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for listening. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay free, everybody.